Hello, everyone, and welcome to Writers Drinking Coffee. This is a podcast of writers who sit around, drink, and talk about writing, publishing, and the whole creative process. We do not censor ourselves, so consider us PG-13. Today it's me again, hosting Solo with episode 94, an interview with Alexander Voynev. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, Jeannie. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Hey, listeners, Alex and I have known each other for about 17 years since we met on a mush. And after 2020, 17 years seems like at least a half century. We met on a Fading Sun science fiction-based mush, and Alex gave the best story and scenes. Flash forward many years, one of my hacky gals was saying that I had to read some gay romance military fiction by this guy named Alexander, and I died laughing. I'm like, oh, Alex, you're never going to guess. So what have you been doing? Did you write much before you started mushing, or did that launch your storytelling genius?
Genius. No, I think it was kind of, oh God, when I was kind of playing, as a child, I was always making up stories while we were, playing catch. So I was very much always trying to entertain like my playmates. And that kind of fairly seamlessly morphed into running tabletop games. And then obviously when tabletop is kind of mushing was really the extension of then tabletop games. But at that point, I had already kind of started reading about how to build a story or writing my own stories. So it's kind of, I've always been a storyteller, and the medium, whether it's a mush or a role-playing game, a traditional one, or entertaining friends with a story is kind of for me almost the same thing. Certainly satisfies the same brain circuits as it were. So I'm pleased it was fun.
Well, I can see that. It's an extension of every little kid who's ever played The Floor is Made of Lava. It's not just jumping from place to place. It's the floor is made of lava, and we're on this alien world, and these are all this volcanic rock structure, and we're here because we're explorers. And I love that. I think you advance the theory that writers really are just in touch with our childhood brains of what is the context around this thing that I'm doing?
Oh, very much. I think one of the, ego wounds, if you want to be cute about it, was when my childhood friends kind of grew up and then were interested in like boys or, at that point, boys, but girls would have been the same thing. And I was just heartbroken because suddenly all my stories and the imaginary worlds and characters, they didn't seem to matter to them anymore, but they mattered to me, and I kind of kept them alive. And I got to the point where it was good enough to kind of reach a bigger audience and maybe even get paid for it. So it's really a way of not murdering that urge, that storytelling thing that we all have as people.
So was your progression from mushing and interactive storytelling? Did you start on short stories, or did you go directly into novels?
I was just telling the stories of characters that I kind of had in my head, and it was very much slice of life. I didn't really know how plot really works, or even how to end a story. But luckily, that's something you can learn. And certainly, when you write adventures, the people want closures. There are people who run games for 15 years or something, but kind of the reality is, if you can kind of provide a closure or this satisfying moment of, if you can kind of time that and get that just right, I really prefer that to open-ended things these days.
I can see that because in episodic writing, the best ones have the long story arc that can carry you from season to season, but you still kind of need a little bit of a cherry on top at the end of every episode.
Yeah.
Even if
and I like the closure. I have real trouble with series that run for 10, 15 years because, who has that attention span? I don't. I'm happy to get immersed for a few months, but after that, I start to kind of look around for other things.
I hear you. Is there a formula? Now, I have a question based on a blog you were writing. Is there a formula for romance? And I know that and I love thrillers, and I write, the thriller genre as well. But romance, you mentioned there was a company that said, "Oh, that's not romance." Is it different if you want to categorize something as romance and you're going to a publisher? Are there rules? Is there a formula that you have to follow? And does it vary by publisher?
Yes, but I'm really bad at it. So kind of, I'm sometimes even struggling a little bit with categorizing myself as a romance writer, because it used to be very much like I have queer characters, and they also have a love plot going, but also other things. And certainly about 10 years ago, anything with a love story with, two guys, for example, would be categorized as romance. But in the past, 5 years, really the heteronormative classic category romance has really shaped and changed my genres. So I kind of moved from inside the genre to kind of hanging on by my fingernails. And the idea is obviously, you want to have both characters as much as possible in the same room. It always has to have a happy ending, and I'm completely okay with that. I mean, that is literally the definition of romance versus a love story where you can, kill people. But I try not to kill my main characters because I really like them. And I think, killing the gays is so 1980s really. So I like happy ending. The happy ending is definitely the one thing that absolutely has to happen. As far as romances go, I have been told I am too plotty. There's too much character and too much plots, and people really just want the relationship. For me, that's a little bit unsatisfying. I think the most sometimes successful romances that I see are very much in the category romance, where the relationship is literally 90% of the book. And that's fine. I mean, they're really cool. They're very popular. No judgment.
No. But on the other hand, I'd been convincing my husband had read a couple books, and he came to me and he's like, what is this? Why won't they just kiss already? Why do they have to spend 3/4 of the book deciding that they are worthy of being kissed by somebody else, and that this person who's clearly hanging around finds them attractive? This is not hard. And I had to stop and sigh. I'm like, I know, honey, I know. And there is a presumption sometimes that I don't know if it is a projection that, are we worthy of love? Are we desirable? Does this person who somehow is stuck with us, dodging bullets and everything else, are they actually attracted, even though they keep touching us at every? It seems like there's a deliberate blindness that people write into some of the heroes and heroines of any genre. And how do we ease past that to say it's okay to realize that you are worth being loved? I know that's a lot to unpack.
I struggle with characters being extremely blind and extremely totally naive, if it were, because as a reader, I find it it makes me unhappy and angry when I literally have to scream, when I end up shouting at the screen or the paperback, like, just talk to each other. I mean, it's not hard.
That's like the idiot ball of like, who's carrying the idiot ball?
Yeah. Definitely.
If your entire plot can be broken apart by a frank, honest communication, one conversation, if that destroys your whole book, then we have a problem.
Also, another famous thing which worked for many, many romances, and people love that stuff. When suddenly like a brother or sister or friend shows up and they hug and it looks like they're kissing, and the other person sees it and then storms off, and they don't talk, and exactly what you did. And for me, that's not enough. I end up with that kind of thing, like, why do I want you guys to fall in love if you're that stupid? Because a relationship is so much work, and there are so many other conflicts. And if that thing breaks you already, I don't think that marriage or that long-term relationship is going to last.
Yeah, instead of thinking, oh my God, that guy was kissing you, think, was he being a predator to you? Are you okay? Can we get you to a safe place? Do I need to go hit him?
That's a good. I like that. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, and maybe that's sort of breaking apart a little bit of the myth and it's starting might be something that we see more, because more and more, if you look at socially, if you see somebody walking down the street and you see a guy menacing a girl, there's all kinds of discussion now about how we go up to the girl, hey, are you okay? Is this guy bothering you? And the guys are starting to come a couple of, hey, buddy, good to see you again. Give him a big hug. Just break up the interaction. And, hey, how are you doing? Ask the girl. Does she want him there? And I'd love to see that in a romance novel.
I think actually it is happening. I see a lot of stuff around consent. It used to be sexy when one love interest would kind of press the other one against the wall and force a kiss upon them, and they don't want it at first, but then they really want to, and their heart is beating so strong, and the body says yes and the mind says no. And I see that getting replaced a lot with explicit discussions of consent, even in queer romances.
That is a beautiful thing.
One partner does no longer overwhelm the other, and the other one finds that sexy. However, I also think it is an erotic fantasy to be, for many people. I think it's a number one or number two fantasy to not give consent, to get raped or to get pushed into an act. And I think romance kind of has to exist between those tensions.
Yeah,
and they're huge. They're real. It's a real problem. How do I not get rapey?
and if you say, okay, this is a little bit rapey, but I want to point out that it's a little bit rapey, and how do I correct that within the context of the story to maybe make an object moral lesson about how, this is bad and this is better.
Yeah, or some people are really bad at communicating consent, or I definitely have a couple sex scenes where one character suddenly goes like, I'm actually not really into this, but because of expectations, it's actually easier to not kick up a fuss. And response to that are really interesting, because many people say like, oh yeah, basically everybody of us has had that kind of sex, and it's interesting to see it on the page like that. But obviously that's not romance sex. That's just sex, just humans being really bad at giving and communicating consent, as it were.
Well, it's super hard to remember that the 90s were 30 years ago. So the end of all of those, just kiss her until they say yes, just, hold him until he says, it is not really real anymore. And it used to be that, I remember I was a child in the 80s, and you didn't want to be a cock tease because that sort of labeled you and that was bad. And for anybody who ever slept with somebody they didn't want to because they changed their mind, but they're like, crap, I'm here and my clothes are off. If I say no, that's not fair. And for all those of us that went through that, like, that's no longer real. And I love that it's not real anymore and starting to be reflected in writing too.
Absolutely. It has definitely changed. And all the things that, as a female bodied person, all that stuff about like, oh yeah, that is just how it is for women, or, it's just something you have to deal with. And all these things are really getting questioned now. And I love seeing all these, the counter movement, if you like, feminism, and actually making people aware of what is going on the female side. It's no longer getting sidelined as, oh yeah, it's a minority.
It's true. And it's a good thing. All right, I want to turn the topic dial away from the sex scenes into the fantastic action scenes and say, I love the research that you do. You have clearly researched and done a lot of writing and study on boxing, on military and war, especially Russian front, on the history of magic and beliefs. Tell me about some of the research that you've done and how it informs and infects your writing.
God, where do I even start? I am literally surrounded by walls of books in my study right now. And I'm just the stuff.
They are. I've looked over their shoulder. It's everywhere.
And there's just upstairs. I mean, downstairs looks arguably worse. I think the biggest thing I've done was I've literally started studying astrology because one of my side characters is a professional astrologer. And then I got really into it. I have ridiculous amounts about certainly the Second World War because, as a German, I thought I was quite well informed, but in many ways I wasn't. And at some point, I think I basically did so much research for Nightingale, for example, about the German occupation of Paris from the 1940s. I could have probably written a doctoral thesis about it. So that's roughly the extent where I go to. So I try to get memoirs, diaries of the times. I look at the weapons. I look at YouTube channels to get some sounds just right. It's ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. But if I feel I can move freely in the setting and actually gather good details about it, I can kind of transport the reader better.
Well, I think you can. And it's, as a reader, it's so easy to get thrown out by something that is just dead wrong. Like something that I know for sure that we all have our own little areas of expertise. Like my uncle did his PhD in trains of Europe during World War II. So let me tell you, he may know even more about your German train system than you do, because this was his depth. And I had said something once and he's like, you lost me. Like, what? It's like, you said this and this was so dead wrong that I just sort of tuned out of everything else you said. I'm like, I see. And this can really happen to readers too. So it makes it better, I think, that you write adventures that do clarify and have real relationships and understanding of, frankly, even the zeitgeist of what it is in this particular area, what is real for this character.
Yeah, I mean, just for one of my Russian characters, so he was born in 54, and he would be very much kind of in the final stages of Stalinism and the movement of the Soviet Union, kind of the whole relationship about Stalinism. So Stalinism really doesn't happen in the book, but he would be informed by it and shaped by it. And I had Russian readers email me in Russian going like, oh, how do you know all this? And it's amazing. And where are you from and stuff? And I go like, all I did was research, guys. I don't even speak Russian. But I'm glad I'm glad I sold it to you, because that's roughly the level I want. I want to be able to have an informed conversation with somebody who actually knows about this stuff.
I wonder if it is a common quality of writers that do this, that I'm just going to say, rather than the ability to write or tell stories, the ability to remember, to learn things and remember them and adjust them and then be able to apply them. Like this idea of, you've looked into it, you've researched it, you understand that maybe Stalin was dead, but what he created didn't just die with him right away. It was leached all the way out into the school systems. And so it informed everybody that grew up through the 60s and 70s in small towns across Russia, or the Soviet Union at the time. And it formed your character in a certain way.
Yeah, there's a certain,
yeah, I was going to say that's very powerful to keep in mind and to remember that as you're writing. How is the change? I mean, global politics have changed dramatically in the last 10 years. How does that change your writing and topics?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say 2016, Brexit, and then obviously your Orange Menace on your side.
On the first year of Brexit, the EU gave to me.
Yeah, it was very much like, holy shit, it's all falling apart. I have to say, I got so angry in many ways. All the stuff that you kind of take for granted, you think like humanity has progressed to a certain point, and suddenly, the counter swing happens, and fascism suddenly isn't dead, and people, people like Robert, what's his name, Spencer, all these polished Nazi boys suddenly show up again. And as historian, you go like, holy shit, I know where this stuff can lead quite quickly. So I got very politicized, well, more clearly politicized. I mean, I was always kind of left off center, very humanist, very much like liberal democracies generally. And I really like international cooperation. And that was suddenly something that I almost had to defend against some people. Yes. So it was interesting to suddenly see all these people, let me call them people, crawl out from under the woodwork and suddenly think, their opinion is okay to say, like, we need to kill certain people,
And you have it, I mean, you have an easy research across the table. Your partner's British, right?
Yep, that too. But also, I obviously live in England, and I see what the Tory party has been getting up to, and the complete collapse of the opposition. I mean, you guys at least managed to, to turn the ship around, but over here it's darkness, dude. But what it certainly does is I'm looking at historical novels more really from a current perspective. So what I want to write about next is certainly a book about like what was it like when the Nazis were gone again, or how did the Nazis actually rise, as a kind of caveat, like we're closer to the shit than we would have thought 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And certainly my latest book, Mean Machine, is basically a tirade of rage and anger against the Tories, the conservatism that sees our values only as cogs in a machine, and in the value that we can extract from humans who are less privileged than the rich white boys who made their fortunes of slave trades and sugar plantations, and the whole scale rape and murder of indigenous populations around the world. So you could say I'm definitely politicized. And I also think it's important because art has become one of the few ways how you can now express the full extent of the anger.
I think art is also one of the ways that you can reach into anybody's house and start creating other use cases and show them new ideas and say, okay, you live in your small area and maybe you're only surrounded by white people that are also conservative like you, and that you went to the same school, and art and books and literature kind of blow through that like a little hand grenade of saying, let me give you another perspective. Let me give you the ability to empathize with a character in a book. And maybe that empathy will be something that you can take with you the next time you meet somebody. Then you're like, oh, this really is just like the scenario I just read about. I like to hope so anyway.
No, I'm not sure who said it, but I think somebody coined the term empathy machine for a novel.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly spot on. I can't remember the name. I'm bad with names at this point. But yeah, it does. And I had, readers emailing me saying like, oh yeah, I never thought that, gay men had the same depth of love and understanding and relationship as we do. But, it's a beautiful thing. And I went like, I'm kind of shocked how you got to my books. But I'm happy you think so.
Wow. And yeah, that would be almost something I'd want to frame because that's really beautiful.
Yeah, at first it was like, yeah, how can you not think that? But if it helps people understand, I'm all for it.
Well, I think it's especially good. And this was, I'm just going to derail it and talk about a similar topic we were talking on another forum where men have had limited ability to express a lot of emotion. The only emotion that men are allowed to express is anger. And it's like somehow people don't even categorize it. That is an emotion also. Anger and aggression is as much of an emotion as sorrow and mourning and all of these other things. But this one is manly and those are not. And it's created a certain, not just toxic hypermasculinity in some individuals, but at the same time, it has harmed the ability to understand that men grieve and little boys are, I have found generally, sorry guys, more emotional than little girls and less emotionally resilient than a lot of little girls because frankly, testosterone makes for a whole lot of emotions in you. And maybe by reading a gay romance will help somebody say, wow, guys feel all of these things and it's okay to talk about them. And that's why I think it's really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in gay romance, this whole male role of, the conqueror, the dominant billionaire CEO who pushes the virgin up against his desk or something, obviously that role is, yes, it is available, but in gay romance, the other role is certainly different. Personally, I really like to have, if I write about to men specifically, to negotiate, what are the roles, what is power, what range of emotion is available to express, and certainly the topic of how does this character construct masculinity. What does this character think is acceptable behavior for himself without feeling less of a man? And it's a minefield if you look at it. I mean, I'm kind of looking at it from the outside, having been not really socialized as a girl, but kind of expected to perform as a girl. So it's interesting. Certainly, I see a lot of damage done to men, biological cis men that I see, based on how much emotion is acceptable and how they're allowed to express it. It's terrible. Patriarchy really fucks up men quite badly. I can't say fuck on the show, right?
You can. We're PG-13. F-bombs are perfectly okay. I love your blog for having advice to new writers. There were two that sort of seemed to conflict, and so I wanted to bring them up and talk about them and get your elaboration on it. One was an issue that said, always try to create a persona that is separate from you so that you don't have crazed readers or people, or let's just say shiny people on a weird cult stalking you and killing you in your sleep. I mean, that seems like an important thing to think about sometimes for authors.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to having certainly, most authors still have a day job. And it has happened that the day job and the creative expression have conflicted in ways that, for example, I know of at least one case where a teacher lost her job because ultimately what the school authorities thought she was doing was to peddle porn to minors, and she wasn't. And it wasn't porn anyway. It had a couple explicit scenes.
There was another story of a teacher that wrote thriller novels about killing students, and so they were fired because they thought they were going to kill students. Like, you show me a teacher that has not imagined killing their students, and I don't think you can. But yeah.
No. I believe it. Yeah, but the thing is, if you do make enemies, or you have a reader who really disagrees with you, or a colleague, or somebody out there, the internet is full of strange people sometimes. Many of them are wonderful, but some are very, very weird. And so kind of keeping your author name and your real name, or the name on in your passport separate, helps you against people like emailing your employer saying, oh yeah, you have this author, and they blogged about how they're working, how they're writing at work or making notes, and that can lead to some really, really unpleasant conversations, I guess, with your boss and or HR. For example, I work in financial services, and I keep my birth name, or my legal name, as it were, quite separate, because it's none of people's business. And I'm not entirely sure how my investment banking colleagues would respond to me writing explicit porn. They know me as an editor and as a grammar Nazi, as it were. So,
but I want to say that I want to balance this, on the other side of the term catfishing. That if you've not looked up like the term catfishing, I'll put a sample out there in the notes, but pretending to be something you're not as a writer is important too, because I was considering repitching my thriller novels as a guy writing to see if I could get more engagement as a guy than I got as a woman. So what are your thoughts on don't be a catfisher at the same time that you're needing to separate your persona?
Basically, both genders have pretended to be the other gender forever, to the point where women weren't able to publish, and they had to take on male pseudonyms. I think, Georges Sand. It's really common. So, obviously, J.K. Rowling, her turfness has published under a kind of ambivalent name to be taken seriously by a presumably male readership. I think that is completely acceptable. Where things get really dicey is when, certainly in the new world, where you can meet your favorite author, or even an author you just like on Facebook, and interact with them, and they might run like GoFundMe's or something. And sometimes people obviously have health struggles and others, but there have been cases where, for example, somebody has pretended to be a bisexual man with multiple health conditions, raised money for cancer treatments, and God knows what else was it. There was like a transplantation and stuff. So it's very serious, health issues, certainly in the American healthcare system, where the support from the state or from insurers is not what it really should be.
We know, we're sorry.
That is kind of the context where these things happen. And then you have, obviously, then they have a readership, and they're poor, bedraggled bisexual men, and they have health issues, and they raised thousands and thousands of dollars, and it turns out it was a woman who basically just used the face of her husband as the bisexual toy boy, and none of it was real. And it was a big scandal in my industry, 2017 or 18. And these things happen, and other people kind of pretend they are wheelchair bound, or are parts racial minorities who obviously need more exposure, and people are, I think, really trying to support, even more marginalized voices. But if it turns out to be a white cis middle class woman who just uses that to pin books, at that point things get really, really difficult.
Yeah, I was going to say that makes perfect sense that way. Don't try to steal the advantages of an already disenfranchised group.
Yeah, certainly the support that becomes available. I mean, I've seen cases where one of my friends got catfished and basically had an online relationship with what they thought was a disabled wheelchair-using gay male author. And it turns out it was a woman, and, presents were exchanged, and a lot of emotional investment was made, certainly from one side. And my friend was very, very deeply hurt, having been betrayed like that. I think the moment you use a different persona for an advantage, specifically when you pretend to be somebody who's in an even weaker, even more marginalized position, specifically to sell more books or to run a GoFundMe or something, that is, I think, there's an ethical border that has nothing to do with protecting yourself or protecting your, real life job. It's difficult because sometimes...
That is, but I think that's a good way to put it. It's like if this is an ethical problem that you would feel bad about standing in front of 1,000 fans and confessing, then don't do it.
Very much so. And the internet allows us to, to run these scams and it happens, but very often these things then, blow up at some point. Somebody will put two and two together, do a bit of detective work. And I have seen author careers blow up from that, so you put in all the work and the books might even be really good, but you're completely destroying your social standing, your reputation. Even big publisher book contracts got removed and cancelled because the person was a catfisher and did unethical things.
It's true. On the internet, nobody knows that you're a espresso machine. So
yeah, I could be an espresso machine. I would like that, I think.
If I had to be an object. What are you working on now? Tell me about your latest project.
Well, the latest one, I'm kind of currently in the research stage of a really weird Second World War plus paranormal thing where I basically have a apocalyptic battle between the Nazi majors and the Russian shamans in the ruins of Stalingrad. So that is very strange and really cool, and it's a long-term project.
That sounds like fun. Give us a hint of how you're constructing it. Clearly it's got to be character-driven because that's what you do.
Yes. Well, that one is actually quite different because almost the world came at the same time as the characters. So it's kind of the question, like normally I start with the character and interrogate them, what is your problem and what do you want to achieve? And then I basically try to ruin their day. As in I give them obstacles where they get pushed back by various forces and stuff. And ideally they obviously achieve what they want to do, but that is kind of how I build things first around the character. In this case, that is very high concept, very complex worlds, which is usually how I start these things. But it's a couple more years yet. There's
a lot of people that don't know anything about Siberian shamanism or some of the things, so this will be a great read, and I look forward to it. In the meanwhile, I will put links to the podcast and the interesting things that Alex and I have talked about on our website, which is www.writersdrinkingcoffee.com. You can also find us on Facebook or Twitter. Alex, if somebody has a question for you, will you answer that for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. You've been listening to Writers Drinking Coffee, a labor of love and enthusiasm put together by the hosts. Our main web support magic is brought to you by Deirdre Schween, and our sound engineer is backup web spider is David Welsh. Our intro music is Pretty Maid Milking a Cow, and our exit music is Breakfast with a Morning Person, both by Michael Engberg. You can hear more from Michael Engberg on manyhatsmusic.com. Our sponsors are Art, Coffee, Chocolate Coffee, Rum, and Coffee. And we love Jackal Designs. And hey, all of you out there, thanks for listening.